All right, well, I'm here with Maria Johnson, the author of my Badass Book of Saints, which we'll be talking about today. So we're going to give a couple more minutes for people to arrive at the live Q&A. Um, People are welcome to offer their questions in the chat section just below the video feed. And otherwise, we'll just be having a little conversation talking about Maria, her life and her story, and a little bit about the book coming that just came out.
Awesome.
All right, so we got about couple more minutes before noon. We promised everybody. We just blasted it all out on social media, so hopefully people are getting that link and getting the live link and getting the video feed of this Q&A.
As I give you the top of my head, that's what I'm doing.
All right.
Tweeting and reposting.
Good deal. I see we have a Mike here in the Q&A. Mike, thanks for coming in. Anybody else, feel free to jump in the chat section and tell us where you're coming from. And if you have any questions at the beginning, feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, we're going to get started.
And there we go.
All right.
I've invited my peeps. Let's. I hope that's Mike Kuipers. I hope that's my pal Mike.
Mike K. Yeah, it might be.
That's it. Hey, and I hope Denise is with him. Hello, guys.
Well, Maria, let's get started, and we'll as people come in and they can ask some questions. Otherwise, we'll just chat a little bit. Today is the feast of Saint Francis Xavier Cabrini, who's the patron saint of immigrants, and I'd like to start there if we can, because it definitely connects with your story. She's not in your book. She's not one of the. I'm sure she is badass, but she's not one of the badass saints in the book. But it certainly connects a little bit with your story. Tell us where you were born.
Well, I was born in Santa Clara, Cuba, in the early 1960s, right at the beginning of the communist regime in Cuba, and right immediately after the October crisis that shut down Cuba and began the embargo that's still in place 50 years later.
And even before that, you have a kind of a family of immigrants. That your grandparents had come from Spain. Is that right?
That's right. My grandparents were Basque nationals, and the Civil War in Spain was raging right at about the time of the Second World War, too. And so my grandparents emigrated to Cuba to escape some of that strife.
So how old are you when you came here to the States?
I just turned 3.
Wow.
I arrived to the United States on my father's birthday and
That,
in January and turned 3 in March.
that was the first time you met him, right?
That was the first time I met him. It was remarkable.
Do you remember? You're 3 years old. How
Yeah,
much do you remember of it?
I remember 2 scenes. I remember that he brought me a little cartoony stuffed animal harlequin that was very colorful, and I still have it. And I remember in the Atlanta airport, the light blue that seemed to be the I don't know, the constant decor in an in an airport in the 60s. So yeah, so I remember those 2 scenes rather vividly, actually.
All right. And so what was that? No. What was it like to meet your dad for the first time? I mean, do you remember being emotional as a young girl? And I mean, what was that
Um,
experience like?
it's in terms of remembering him so much, not so much.
Yeah,
I felt like I always had him in my life.
sure.
Um, but I heard stories from my parents that I wouldn't call him daddy or papi as we would in Spanish. I would call him by his name because that's how my mother addressed him, and that's how I had always heard him, spoken about by name. So I think that there was a period of adjustment where he was a little distraught that I wasn't calling him daddy, but
Oh,
obviously I got over that quickly.
oh wow. So, and how often did you revisit Cuba throughout your life? I know we're going to talk about a recent visit you made back there, but how often did you go back?
Never. That was my first visit.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was my first visit to Cuba. That was emotional. That was an epic trip of a lifetime.
I can't even. Let's talk about it because you're posting pictures, and for those of you who don't know, Maria, you were in Cuba during the same time that somebody else pretty famous was there.
That's
Can you
right.
tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in the apostolic visit of Pope Francis, and I was there by invitation from one of the bishops in Cuba, who happens to be my uncle. So
Oh,
that
wow.
was a nice hookup. So my uncle is the Bishop of Holguin, which is where the Pope celebrated the second Mass, and I was
Oh,
at that Mass and was visiting with my uncle. And it's a beautiful story from years ago that my uncle had invited then Bishop Bergoglio to have dinner with my uncle if he was ever in Cuba. And a few decades later, the Pope proved to be a man of his word,
oh my gosh. Wow.
and
Wow.
went and had dinner. Had I think it was a late afternoon lunch with my uncle in his home, and we were there. We were able to have a private audience with the Pope, and yeah, it was pretty spectacular.
It's funny when I first saw the pictures you were posting online, you see so many of these cardboard cutouts of the Pope. And at first I saw like, oh, that's kind of cool. She's got a picture of one of those cutouts. And then I realized, oh my gosh, she's in Cuba and she's with the Pope. And that is a selfie with the actual
That is
uh, Pope.
that a real selfie. It is a real selfie, and I teased about doing it. I had told my mother. In fact, my mother was very agitated because at
Yeah,
every opportunity I would tell her I'm going to take a selfie with the Pope, and and she's very proper, and she was like, "Oh, that's disrespectful." And it did stick in the back of my mind. I didn't want to be disrespectful, believe it or not to the Pope, because I know that he likes selfies. He takes
sure.
selfies with people all the time, but I didn't want to be disrespectful of the situation that my uncle had provided for us, this
Right.
special occasion, and that I'm going to, do something kitschy and try to get a selfie with the Pope. So I did. I got cold feet, and we lined up as in birth order of the siblings, because this was also a very beautiful reunion for my
Mhm.
mother and her siblings, because the five of them were together. I think for the first time in like something like 20 years.
Wow.
They'd seen each other in different sets of siblings, but not all five together. And
Wow.
so they were being presented to the Holy Father in birth order. And so I was with my mother. I came, kind of attached to her, right?
Hmm.
And so I slipped the phone to my other uncle, and I said, "I don't have a pocket in my dress. Can you hold my phone?" So he had it. And as I got up to the Holy Father, I don't know, I was emboldened.
Hmm.
All those courageous saints and women in the book,
Oh,
they,
that's
they
great.
spoke to me in one moment and said, "Chicken."
Oh,
So, so I said, "Okay, I can do this." So I turned around and I told my uncle Daniel, I said, "Give me the phone." And the look on his face was classic. He was like, "You're going to do it."
oh,
Yes.
that's great. Oh,
So we pulled it out, and we had a very nice conversation. And at the end of the conversation, right before I was leaving away, I felt like a little kid. I felt like a little girl. I said, "Holy Father, can I have a selfie with you?" And he laughed.
I
He said, "Sure."
can
So
imagine.
as soon as I extended my arm, the Vatican photographers, they were kind of milling around, and they all started shooting the picture. So what's really funny is not the selfie, but that I have the picture link to the Observatory, right? That had
Yeah.
all the photographers there, and there's like 10 pictures of me like this.
Oh,
It was
what a
pretty
story.
cool. Yeah, yeah, it was
Wow.
a lot of fun.
Did you, I mean, do you mind? What did you talk about? Was it just kind of a casual conversation
It was, just some family questions, and he was
yeah.
inquiring after my husband and the children, because he knew something
Mhm.
of the family that he'd been chatting with my uncle, no doubt. And so he just asked after the family, and the usual things that I guess people ask the Pope: "Pray for us and
Yeah.
bless us," and he's doing the same.
Yeah. I think I love the bet that he asked you about your family, though. That's really incredible. He's just curious and wants to know more about you as a person. Not,
Yes.
that's beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, well, you're probably still riding that high, huh, from that experience.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Every time I see the pictures, I can't believe it. Mind blown.
so, I mean, so your uncle is a bishop in Cuba, and
Yes.
of course, growing up, your family was Catholic, and it couldn't have been easy to be Catholic. Was he, your uncle and your family, were they kind of clandestine? Were they hiding the faith, or what was that experience like for your family and for yourselves?
It wasn't so much clandestine as it was very difficult.
Hmm.
Most of the churches were closed down. one of the stories that I don't tell in the book, but that I often share with people, is that I was confirmed immediately
Yeah.
um, after I was baptized, because the priest had been expelled from Cuba. And, within a few years, most of the religious brothers and sisters had been rounded out, and deported. And so it wasn't easy. A lot of churches were closed. Um, my uncle did go to seminary and was uh, able to follow through with his ordination, and then, of course, become a priest and then a bishop. But it wasn't an easy thing. And church attendance was not just discouraged, it was punished.
Wow. Wow.
So, yeah, it was an official atheist state. So it was not easy. Absolutely, we came to the United States for political and religious freedom. There's no
Yeah.
question about it.
What was the? You said that you were punished. What kind of punishments were being given if you're able to talk about it?
Well, for example, my cousins can tell stories about going to school on Monday morning and having an assembly where
Hmm.
students were asked who went to mass or who went to church, and the ones who came forward were then sent to what amounts to like an in-house suspension, where they were isolated from their peers and they were isolated from the school activities that day,
Wow.
which is really terrible because they're really prevented from learning, which is why
Hmm.
they had gone to school. And so I think that this isolation over time just really makes the kids resentful, and doesn't support any kind of continuing to attend mass or to attend any kind of religious activity, because there's going to be a punishment attached to it at a very young age.
I don't want to get too political, and I'm not big on in
Sure.
politics as well. But of course, what's the family reaction been to recent developments with the U.S. and Cuban relations?
Well, I think I wrote about it rather openly in a few places online.
Yeah.
I I would like to see the embargo go away. It's not a popular opinion among some of the older Cuban immigrants, but um, you know, if you want to have the political conversation, I'll have it. It's it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
An embargo is effective if the world is involved in it. The whole world is not involved in it. That was a one-time activity that could have been pressed for a year, but I don't know.
Right.
Somehow I think that Coca-Cola and McDonald's in Havana would change things a lot quicker than politics.
Is that right? In what way? What do you mean?
Just opening the world. I think Saint John Paul II said in his visit to Cuba in the 90s, he said, it's time for Cuba to be open to the world, and for the world, to be open to Cuba.
Just like
And
culturally, you mean? I mean, just having
sure,
that. Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. Well, you mentioned earlier your baptism, and you said, and I remember that story in your book. You talked about how because you were confirmed as an infant, you never got the chance to pick a confirmation saint, and
Right,
so
right.
you did recently, or I don't know when, but somewhat recently, pick a confirmation saint. And who did you pick?
I picked Saint Teresa of Avila, and that's kind of a convoluted family story, because we were having a conversation on SQPN's Catholic Weekend,
Hmm.
which is a podcast that I co-host, and it turns out that my co-hosts, we're talking about their confirmation saints, and I was having my own pity party in the corner
Oh,
because because I didn't have a confirmation saint, and so I was encouraged to discern, for a while, and pick one. And so I had a year of discernment. I really did. I spent a whole year studying and reading up on saints, and it turns out that my family has a big connection to Saint Teresa of Avila. My mother, her sisters, my mother-in-law, and her sisters all studied at a Carmelite school in Cuba.
mm,
And so I'd always had Saint Teresa present to me in some way or another. And the more I read about her, the more I thought, oh, wow, now here is a formidable woman, a badass. And, and I picked her. And so I kind of chose her. And then in the last year or two, I've had some encounters with, believe it or not, St. Rose of Lima, who's also one of the saints in the book. And
yeah.
I seem to be finding her anywhere. So I'm kind of revisiting that friendship.
Yeah, I'd like to let's talk about the book a little bit. So the book itself, you may be able to describe it better than I can, but it's essentially a collection of badass holy women and saints, and that's one of them, one of the saints. And there's a number of other saints that you picked, and you matched them with some other women who, had kind of some qualities that I think are admirable. And so I guess just let's start from the beginning of where the idea came from, and what was the inspiration for. I mean, there's lots of books out there about
Hmm.
saints and even saints for women, but this is a really unique approach that goes beyond just the title, I think. But what is it
Yeah.
that about these women that you drew that you to want to share their stories?
Well, I think like most of us, we're pretty tied to social media. And
Hmm.
so when I wake up in the morning, I have a routine, and part of that routine is to check in with my email. And since I've got the computer open, I go ahead and look at Twitter and Facebook. And I had just seen the breaking news that Sister Blandina Segal had her cause open
Mm.
for canonization. And so I thought, wow, who is this woman? So I'm reading it, and she has a remarkable story. She settled in the West during the wild West days in the 1800s, and she went out there to establish hospitals and schools, and so she did some good work. Um, but the thing that struck me about her story was that she had encountered Billy the Kid several times in her lifetime. And the first two times that she encountered him was really to waggle a finger at him and say, no, no, you're
Mhm.
being a bad boy and don't do this. Once he came to see her because she was caring for a member of his posse who had been shot and had been rejected by the local doctors. And he went to find out who had rejected him in order to kill them, to execute them. And Sister Blandina told him no, that he was not going to do that. And for whatever reason, the spirit, her strength, her audacity, the insanity of this small woman telling him, no, you're not going to go and do this, whatever reason, caused him to stop and actually not murder these men. And then years later, she encountered him in a robbery when he was going to rob the wagon train that she was in, and he looked in her car and saw her, doffed his hat, and turned around. So he spared those passengers because of her presence. So what a remarkable woman! And I think I had posted some comment along the lines of, we need some more gun-toting nuns
Hmm.
or something like that. And it got the attention of one of the editors at Ave Maria Press, and started the conversation about other extraordinary women, and there was the book. I mean, the book happened pretty quickly, actually, when you think about how quickly I got involved in it, and how quickly I wrote it.
I remember the book coming up for acquisition. We were, meeting about it. And I do remember that story vividly. That the gun-toting nun was definitely a good catchphrase that we used to kind of describe the book as well. And as it evolved, it became pretty clear that the title was going to be pretty unique as well. That My
Hmm.
Badass Book of Saints. And
Yeah.
um, I didn't realize until recently the personal connection that had. First of all, for us to make that decision to say, yeah, let's go with that title. We thought for sure people were going to be, too scared to go with it, but everybody got behind it right away and was very excited. But there's a personal connection to that word. And can you just describe that for us a little bit?
There is, and it's really a neat story. I was that kid that parents get a little agitated with. I was always climbing trees and falling out of trees, and I wouldn't just scrape my knees. I would come in really all banged up, and my mother would call me tremenda. And in Spanish, tremenda is a word that has a lot of meanings. It means tremendous. It sounds like it could be translated as tremendous, but actually it means really bold and audacious, and it's really formidable, um, extremely audacious. And so that word translates pretty much to badass in English. And it's funny because over the years, I heard my mother refer to Saint Teresa of Avila as tremenda.
Oh wow.
So it was a nice association. I certainly wouldn't want to offend anyone with that word, but I think that's how it's used in today's culture. These were some badass women,
Yeah.
real bold, audacious, brave, courageous, uh, unafraid.
Why is it so important that that we share these stories of tremenda women today? I mean, what is it about in the Catholic Church that women need to hear these stories?
Well, these are women. We're all women like them. We
Mhm.
all can rise to our occasion, and these are women who did it. And I think their stories of courage can embolden us to fulfill what God has in store for us, what our mission in our life is. And I think that we need to do it boldly, and we need to do it fearlessly, and to not be afraid that we have Christ.
I love it. Yeah, I've got three daughters, and I got excited because I love for them to grow up to be so courageous and bold as you described
Sure.
so many of the women in the book. Can you tell us more? So we have the gun-toting nun. Who are some of the other figures, stories that you included? You mentioned Saint Rose of Lima, Saint Teresa of
Right.
Avila, a few others. I don't have any in particular that I wanted to, but I'd love
Yeah.
to hear what you think. So a few of the stories.
Well, I want to really showcase the fact that when I talk about courage, there's different kinds of courage. So they're not all gun-toting women, and
Hmm.
they're not all women who are fighters in the physical sense. So there's a kind of there's certainly a virtue to having that quiet courage that is persistence, and so I think I have a good sampling of those qualities. My favorite, I think, absolutely my favorite character, if you will,
Hmm.
woman in the story is Nancy Wake, who was the French resistance fighter. She was a socialite during World War II. She came from Australia, married a Frenchman, and somehow became involved with the French resistance through her husband's business dealings, where he was perhaps being used as a front, a business front, or at least using his connections to help with uh, the sending of information and whatnot behind the lines. And so it became kind of natural that Nancy would also become involved in this. And she was the perfect cover because she was this beautiful socialite. Who would imagine that she could possibly be not just a spy, but she rose to captain in the French resistance. And so she was probably in charge of maybe about 3,000 men at some point during the war.
Wow.
And her story is really extraordinary in that she had eluded the Nazis. She was very close to capture at one point, but they were able to convince the Germans that she's not. How could she possibly be the person that you're looking for? She's just a socialite, and the Nazis nicknamed her the White Mouse because she was so elusive. And so I tell a little bit about her story in the book, and I have an interesting family connection, not directly with her, but in that same era. My grandfather, my mother's father, was in the north of Spain trying to get out during the Spanish Civil War, and unfortunately, the German Luftwaffe was bombing Spanish villages
Mm.
as target practice, as an aid to General Franco, who was in control at the time. And so my grandfather was actually taken over the Pyrenees Mountains into France by some French resistance soldiers. And so I feel like maybe Nancy Wake was in charge of the unit that that provided his safe
Wow.
travel. And so I discovered this after researching her. So I had been drawn to her story, but the more I read, the more I felt like, wow, maybe she had a direct impact on me, and my grandparents escaped from that situation, and the possibilities of my birth later in Cuba.
That's one thing I love about working in religious publishing. It's so clear in so many of the books that God is behind the pen. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
There's
absolutely.
connections that are being made. It's the inspiration, the creativity, the choices that you're making in the book. It's amazing
Mhm.
how they all get woven together without even it would seem almost magically. Um, where did the other selections come from? Where did you find how were you drawn to some of the other women that are in the book?
Well, some of the women I really researched specifically to find a connection. So, for
Yeah.
example, Saint Bibiana was an intentional choice. I end the book. She's the last saint before I talk about Our Lady. And
Yes.
she's Saint Bibiana, we know very little about, but she's the patron saint of hangovers.
Mm.
And I just, every time I say that, it just makes me laugh. I was a bartender a long time ago.
Yeah.
Um, but Saint Bibiana, really, I wanted to bring her into the book because I thought it was funny, but also because of how we celebrate as Catholics, and how we, when girlfriends get together to celebrate, there's usually a glass of wine that's shared,
Hmm.
or maybe we'll meet, for cocktails or something like that. And so I wanted to bring in, at the end of the book, friendship, because all of these women in the book really come together as my friends by the end. There are different women and different saints who I draw upon, who have these different virtues. And like I said, some of them are really extraordinary fighters, and other ones have a more gentle appeal. Some heavyweights like Saint Teresa of Avila or Saint Catherine of Siena, who were really in your face kind of women. You had somebody a little gentler like Saint Rose of Lima, who cared for the poor and the sick, or Saint Rita of Cassia, who's also one of my favorites in the story because of her story of reconciliation. A lot of people know her as the patron saint of impossible causes
Hmm.
after Saint Jude, um, but really she did something remarkable in trying to pacify a family feud in her town that resulted in her husband's death, and potentially for the not just the death, but the condemnation of her two sons who wanted to, they wanted to get revenge on their father's death. And so she wanted to enter a convent, and the convent says, well, there's just too much drama, attached to what you're doing. You need to release this, and you need to make sure that this drama isn't going to follow you. And so she did. She executed a peace in this town. It was like the Hatfields and McCoys,
Hmm.
and
Wow.
so that was a cool thing. So I've got these two extremes, the fighting women, right,
Yeah.
and then the gentle, courageous women who can do something a little behind the scenes.
You mentioned just now that you kind of see these women as your friends, more or less, and you also, I
Hmm.
remember what you said in your book, that you looked up to your mother's friends as kind of women
Yeah,
to looked up to, and they inspired you. And
right.
um, and I thought that was fascinating, in that that's how essential that is, to have this kind of community of people, especially for women. Um, so Maria, you jumped around, you moved around quite a bit in your adult life, not just as a child, but you moved around different places. And
Hmm.
I first met you, or got to know you, as at Bigo, as the online personality, the Catholic, um, connected to a whole number of people in kind of the Catholic media world.
Uh-huh.
Um, I love that you said also, that you think of that, or you realize that that really is a missionary um, outreach. That what you do in social media really is a form of Catholic missionary work.
Oh,
So I
it
guess I have two.
absolutely
So
is.
two things I want to know about is, first, is this community that you've built or you become a part of. How did you find them all? And then secondly, that realization of it being missionary work. I'd like to hear more about how you see that today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I got involved many years ago actually at the creation of Rosary Army,
Hmm.
with Greg Willits and Jennifer Willits. They
And they're in
were
Atlanta too, right?
actually they're in Colorado now,
Oh, okay, okay.
but they were parishioners in our church, and our children were connected in two extremes. So they had very tiny children, and my kids were in high school, and Greg had learned how to make all-twine rosaries, and was speaking at one of the high school youth retreats that my oldest daughter was at. And
Hmm.
so she came home from the retreat on fire for the rosary, and gave me this rosary that she had made. And she says, look, and I can show you how to make it. And so she taught me how to make it. And so I became involved in making the rosary. And within a few months, I think that Greg had incorporated Rosary Army, and as a nonprofit, and had started this missionary website to make and pray and give away rosaries. That was the tagline for Rosary Army.
Hmm.
And at about that same time, Greg was playing with something that was happening online with the creation of podcasts. And so he called me one night and he said, "Hey, I want you to listen to this." And so I was a good friend and I listened to this awful thing that was very weird and tinny and terrible sounding. And he goes, "That's called a podcast." And I'm like, "Okay,
Ah,
whatever."
yeah.
And he says, "No, no, no. And you've got to listen to this great guy out of uh, the Netherlands, Father Roderick von Hogen." And he says he's reporting, from the Vatican. This was surrounding the death of Pope John Paul at the time. And so they became friends. Greg and Father Roderick became friends. I started listening to Father Roderick on the Secrets of Harry Potter because he was doing a Catholic interpretation or a Catholic analysis, literary analysis of the books. So over time, I met them. I was eventually invited to join on the board of directors of the Star Quest Production Network, SQPN, which Father Roderick still leads today. And this was over 10 years ago. So it's really exciting to have
Wow.
been a part of this very young community. And the purpose that they've always had nation is to lead people to Christ by going out into the world, right? So, for example, my book is not a deep, it's not a deep theological study of anything. It is I'm sharing my story. I think that Pat Goen, who wrote the foreword, said that it's not Butler's Lives of Saints, right? So it's an appetizer to get you interested because is really to go out into the world where people are. We're not of the world, right? But we have to go out, and we're not, part of it in that sense, but that we have to go out and evangelize in that way. If you're going to be watching the Marvel movies, then let's look at some of the virtues that these characters have. Harry Potter, well, yes, there's witchcraft in there, but let's look at the Christian virtues of laying down your life for a friend. So that's how I got involved in this community. And let me tell you, it's a beautiful community. A little shout out to Mike who came and joined us
Hmm.
specifically because of how we feel this tight knit community is really built around friendship. And really, ultimately that's what Christ wants.
Yeah, you're starting to break up a little bit, and but I
Oops.
no, no, it's good. With it's a kind of incredible meeting. So I didn't realize that SQPN, I always get the letters mixed up, but it's been around for that long. And I think you all were doing podcasts before podcasts were cool, and now they're like exploding all over the place. Tell us about what the podcast that you're on. It's called The Catholic Weekend, right?
It's called Catholic Weekend,
Hmm.
and our host Jeff Nielsen, Captain Jeff, um, gathers together friends every week, and it's kind of sometimes we've referred to it as a Catholic water cooler.
Huh.
We're
Yeah.
friends. We come together. We catch up on what's going on in our lives, and what's beautiful about it is that we come from such diverse backgrounds, and work, and so that really exemplifies what I was talking about, that we're living. I'm a professor. I'm Catholic. Um,
Hmm.
Really, I should lead with I'm Catholic in all the things that I do, whether or not I am explicit in that expression. Implicitly, that's who I am. So we get together on the show and we talk about current events and we talk about our lives and we talk about sometimes our challenges with the faith, and hope to bring people into the conversation that you can be Catholic and still laugh and still
Hmm.
have a good time and still like lots of adventures. So it's a fun group of good folks.
Good. Well, Maria, your book is My Badass Book of Saints. And if people want to come connect with you, what's the best places? What's the most frequently used social media or social network by Maria Johnson?
I am on Twitter, I think, too much.
Great.
at Bego, Bego, and that name came from my middle name, which is Begonia. So that's really the name I go by, Maria Begonia. And you can follow me also on Facebook at Maria Johnson. And you can read my blog, mariamjohnson.com.
Good.
And that usually posts I've written recently at catholicmom.com and Wine, Women in the New
Mhm.
Evangelization.com. And I've had a few things over at Alatea too.
Good. Maria, thanks so much for giving us a half hour of your kind of lunchtime here, and then thanks everybody who've watched live, or if you're watching the recording, thanks for checking it out, and I really appreciate it. We're really excited about your book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, well, God bless. See ya.